Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition CFA Society Chicago podcast. Today, we begin a series of interviews with leaders of our society who have had a profound impact in the financial community here in Chicago. I'm Bill Fitzpatrick, current chairman of the board of directors, and also a portfolio manager at Logan Capital Management, where I manage U.S. and international portfolios with a strong emphasis on value investing. Our special guest for today needs no introduction, but we'll give him one anyway. That's Gautam Dhingra. Gautam, of course, is the former founder and president of High Point Capital Management. He is a former board chair of the CFA Society. He has made several contributions here in Chicago to the financial community at large. Gautam, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Bill, for including me in the 100-year celebration for CFA Chicago.
You're most welcome. I'm going to start with your background. I won't do justice to it, so I'm only going to go through the high points. That asks that you do it a lot more accurately and fill in the details. But really, I thought it was threefold in that your contributions as a value manager, number one, High Point Capital, which is also very similar to the Logan Value Team in that you managed U.S. and international portfolios, the performance outstanding over long periods of time. Also, the AUM up to over $1 billion at its peak. And I am a regular reader of your quarterly letters, so thank you for not charging for that. But then I also look at your contributions to the academic community. Somehow you found time to teach at Northwestern at the Kellogg School of Management there, teaching a course on investing. And then many contributions at large to the greater CFA community at the institute level. I see a number of publications in addition to your quarterly letters reflecting on several different themes within finance. And so just a long list of contributions beyond your core work as a value manager, which I think is tremendous. That being said, you also started your career at Hewitt Associates, I know. Right. And maybe you could start there, the origins of your career investing and how you got to where you are today.
Great. Thank you. If you don't mind, I may start a little bit earlier than Hewitt because that has some relevance for what I think I would like to leave people with in terms of how to think about their investing careers. So I picked my career track at the age of 13. That's when I decided I was going to forego sciences and arts and going to focus strictly on everything related to business. So for the next 12 years, I studied everything possible in economics, finance, accounting, mathematics, banking, everything you can think of. Anything but arts and sciences. Now, it worked well because I became pretty good at everything related to finance. And that's what transitioned me to my career. My academic side the learning side culminated with a PhD in finance and econometrics from University of Florida. That was in 1986. My goal was to be an investor, but without meaning to, I had pigeonholed myself as an academic. That was a time when few firms in the investment world were looking at PhDs. They only wanted MBAs. So by getting a PhD, unfortunately, I had put myself out of the world of investing as a practitioner. So then I had to figure out how to do that transition. The problem was even more difficult for me because I was a foreign student. Didn't speak English very well and did not have a work permit. So trying to land an interview when you don't have a work permit and you are a PhD, not an MBA, was difficult. So after trying for a while, I was getting close to giving up and going on the track of being a professor. But my dissertation chairman had sent letters to consulting firms all over the country. And one of them, Hewitt Associates, based right here in the Chicago area, expressed a mild interest. I say mild interest. They called me and said, "We like your resume, but," they didn't want to pay for my airfare to come to Chicago for the interview. They didn't say it in those words. Their response to me was, if you are in the area, stop by, which meant they didn't want to pay for the airfare. I didn't have the money to pay for the airfare to go from Florida to Chicago for an interview, so I thought that was the end of it. So I was getting close to the point of thinking, okay, this is not going to work out. I'm going to be a professor somewhere. But then Loyola University called me and asked me to come and interview for a professor's position. And when that happened, I called Hewitt and I said, hey, guess what? I'm going to be in the area.
Mm-hmm.
So they invited me in. So one thing led to another. Things fell in place.
Mm-hmm.
Hewitt offered me a job as an investment consultant. So for more than a decade, as an investment consultant, I evaluated money managers all over the country because Hewitt's clients were blue chip corporate clients, and they needed to invest billions of dollars, and they needed to figure out who the best money managers were. So at Hewitt, I learned the investment business as a practitioner. I learned how to evaluate money managers. I traveled all over the country to evaluate them, learn from the best of them. And that's what led me to, over time, conclude that I was actually ready to transition from consulting to money management. But by this time, I had pigeonholed myself again. I was an investment consultant, not a money manager. And I had been an investment consultant too long. So I called some of the money managers that I knew very well and said, hey, I just want to be an equity analyst. The answer I got was, well, but you're an investment consultant. So I decided that, okay, I'm going to just skip the analyst role. I'm going to appoint myself portfolio manager. So my wife and I, we both quit our jobs and we started High Point Capital Management, and I appointed myself portfolio manager.
Okay.
With no clients, well, one or two family members.
Okay.
But total assets under management, less than $1 million the day I quit Hewitt.
Wow.
Total revenue projections, day one, under $10,000 annual revenue projections. But we got lucky. We got traction. We did have a well-thought-out investment approach. There were a few people in the industry who believed in me based on their past experience with me. And one thing led to another, and we did have a pretty good 24-year run managing clients' money successfully. So that's kind of a little bit more, bigger, longer background than you probably wanted.
Well, certainly very ambitious. You must have been in your early 30s at the time. Quit what was a very good job at Hewitt to start up a firm with revenues of less than 10,000. So, I certainly admire the ambition there. The next logical question, of course, where does the CFA designation come into play?
So it actually was more important than you might even guess. And in the PhD program, I knew I was getting pigeonholed into an academic career halfway through my PhD program. And I knew I wanted to be a practitioner. So I started thinking about, how do I signal to the world that I want to be a practitioner? I don't want to be a professor. Mm-hmm. And I came up on across the idea that one way to signal your intent is to do a CFA. So what if you are not an MBA from a U.S. university? If I can affiliate myself with the CFA brand, CFA name, CFA designation, I may be able to signal that I may be a PhD, but the practitioner track is what I'm rooting for. So I passed 2 levels of the CFA exam when I was in the PhD program, and I could not have done a better job of signaling to the world that I wanted to be a practitioner. So the CFA designation played a huge role in my ability to signal to the investment world that I was serious about being a practitioner.
Very good. Very good. And I think that's a good message to young professionals, just the opportunities that open at each level. You pass level 1, that'll open some doors, more at level 2, more at level 3.
Yep.
And look at it from an expense standpoint versus an MBA or a master's in something else. Certainly more cost effective as well. So very good. So you've got the designation. You're building High Point Capital. Then you get more involved with the society at large, here at the CFA Society. What drew you in? And tell us about your time there.
So I was pushed into it, I have to tell you.
Okay.
I was pushed into it by my wife, who was the co-founder of the firm.
Okay.
She said to me that CFA Society is a big part of Chicago. It's a big part of the investment profession. You need to be more involved with it. And I said to her, I don't have the time. I'm trying to build a firm. And our firm was based in the suburbs 30 miles out. And it was a big commitment to say I'm going to spend the time commuting in and out when I could be picking stocks or acquiring clients. But as has happened many times, I see the merits of her ideas later, not at the time she said.
Sure.
And she was the one who actually pushed me to join society's activities, not just be a member. So I came to the first meeting as just a member of the education committee.
Okay.
There were 6-7 people around the table, and we talked about ideas for whatever events that we wanted to put on. And coming from an academic background, I was actually able to contribute in ways that others who were practitioners, MBAs, might not have thought of, because I did stay abreast of the latest academic research. So it started with membership of the education committee, which transitioned then into chairmanship of the education committee. And as chairman of the education committee, I had the freedom to organize something that hadn't been done before. And that was to organize a large-scale conference where we collaborated with 7 Midwest societies and brought in the best practitioners from the academics and practitioner world together in Chicago for a 1 full-day conference. And the success of that research conference then led to an invitation to join the board, which a few years later led to another invitation to join the officers' rank, which ultimately led to my staying on to become the chairman, the role that you are very familiar with.
Yes, and we'll come back to that in a minute. I want to make 2 follow-up points on that.
Yeah.
Number one, you came through the Education Advisory Group and had an immediate impact. I think that's a very strong message to our younger members. And our volunteer numbers are a little bit down post-COVID era. But I would say to them, if you're looking to make an impact, get on one of the committees. I had a very similar route through the Professional Development Advisory Group and then onto the board. But with the numbers a little bit lower, anyone joining today, I think can make contributions on day one. I think they should feel good about that. The second point I wanted to remember, this is a podcast that I hope is going to age very well. That conference you had, which I had to check the notes, was 2005.
Yeah.
So 18 years ago. I'm quite certain there's a paper trail on that I could have dug up, but I didn't. Just from memory, I can recall who presented at that conference 18 years ago. And these are heavy hitters. Rob Arnott from Research Affiliates, Francois Trahan, who has an excellent reputation on the sell side, the late Frank Riley, winner of the 2009 Hortense Friedman Award, professor of mine at Notre Dame. His book remains a core component in the CFA curriculum. Who am I missing? Michael Mayo, the highly esteemed bank analyst.
Yep.
That's all just off of memory.
Yeah.
So
the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis chair was here.
Okay.
Yeah. So
okay.
I still remember the poor guy. I was an equity guy. I shortchanged the fixed income track. There were 2 tracks, equity and fixed income.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, this guy is going to be fit for the fixed income track.
Okay.
I put him in a smaller room. While the equity track got the bigger room. And then I started getting calls from Bloomberg and AP and all the press people saying, by the way, we want to come and record your conference. And we are interested in, of course, the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis chair. That's what made me realize that I had actually made a mistake in putting him in the smaller room. It was too late to change it, but I just made a mental note that you can't change bonds. And as we have learned over time, bonds in some ways are more prescient than equities. I don't know if you would agree with that or not. But I did short in bonds that day, and I regret that.
Well, I recall somebody, one of the equity speakers, I can remember this accurately too. It said, "Here, we're on this track down here. If you're downstairs in hell in the fixed income part." So yeah, we all know the reputations and the shots we like to take at each asset class. So fantastic conference that was in 2005. Is there anything, as you reflect on your term, either as a board member or more likely as a board chair, that you're most proud of, or that you'd like to share? We have this picture here for a reason. This is pictured with the keynote speaker when you chaired the annual dinner. That was Nate Silver. I assume that was one of the highlights. What else comes to mind?
Probably a couple of highlights from different events that I was associated with. One was all the way back in 95. And the reason I remember the date, it was February 1995. The reason I remember that so clearly, I was trying to organize an event and I needed one more speaker. I was short one speaker. And we were running out of time. My son was going to be born that week. And my wife, we went to the hospital. She was in labor, and I'm still short one speaker. Okay. So I'm making calls from the hospital room, trying to get this one last speaker. And the speaker that agreed to be my last speaker was Ralph Wenger. Okay. And he was going to talk about mutual fund economics. I don't know if you recall, he had left Harris Associates and gone on his own to do the Acorn funds.
Wenger Associates, right? At the time.
Right. Yeah. And the funds were called Acorn funds. Yep. So Ralph shows up at this conference along with all the other speakers who have great spiffy PowerPoint presentations. He shows up with one-page handout. It's a spreadsheet, just a bunch of numbers and maybe some handwritten notes on top of it. And I will tell you, he stole the show.
Okay.
That one-page spreadsheet and his comments told people more about mutual funds economics, how to start the business, what the margins were, and how to do it right with that one-page spreadsheet than all the other spiffy PowerPoint presentations did. So that event does stand out in my mind quite a bit. Yeah. You mentioned the research conference. One of the keynote speakers there was Steve Levitt, Freakonomics author. So that book was on the bestseller list. So once again, I needed a keynote speaker, and I wanted somebody, a big name. So his name was on the New York Times bestsellers list, and I targeted him. But we had no budget at that time for conferences. All the speakers were non-paid. So I called, inquired about his availability, and I was told by his agent. I didn't get a chance to talk to him. The agent said it's $25,000, and my budget was zero. So I said, I really want him. How do I get him? So I sent him a email to his University of Chicago academic email address. In it, I said, "Dear Professor Levitt, we are a small, not-for-profit organizations trying to do good in the investment world by teaching people how to be better at investing. Our budget is only $10,000. Your agent tells me it's going to cost $25,000.
Okay.
It's too bad we can't get you." I left it at that. I had a reply in 15 minutes.
I bet you did.
Steve said, "I'm sure my agent would understand if I do a not-for-profit event in Chicago for $10,000.
Excellent.
He agreed, and we sold enough extra tickets that we made up the $10,000 that I didn't have.
Good.
So that's the other one that stands out in my mind.
Oh, good. Well, I recall the annual dinner well. Nate Silver had a number of observations that he has a very good track record, and to get his perspective sort of outside of the traditional investing arena, I thought was very interesting. We have a couple other props here. The fancy trophy over there, you see, that's from the Research Challenge, which I know you were involved in.
Yeah.
A somewhat related question there in terms of attracting young professionals. Is there any message you would say? our society as a whole, our membership went a couple decades growing right about GDP, 2-3% or so, steady for a long, long time.
Yep.
COVID has interrupted that. There are other alternatives now. There's more master's degrees than anything, other certifications. So the numbers have flattened out a little bit. You and I, of course, know the value of the designation. What would you tell that 23-year-old who's considering this designation and maybe some alternatives?
I think this is a direct route to being an investment practitioner, more so than the CFP program, more so than the alternative assets designation. It is the broadest. It is rigorous. And as you mentioned earlier, it is more targeted than the MBA program. Mm-hmm. It requires less commitment, but it is more focused on investing. So those are all the reasons why somebody would target the CFA program. But at the same time, I think there's a need for the CFA program to change for some of the same reasons you're outlining. There's competition. And frankly, I think the finance profession has peaked in some sense. Mm-hmm. I think you and I lived through the golden age, at least in the early part of your career and most of my career. So there's a need to evolve at the CFA level also, so that we stay more relevant than the competitors or people who are looking to join our program or somebody else's.
Well, good. And I can tell you from my seat, there are changes coming to the curriculum, which I think is encouraging. And I couldn't agree more. Either you evolve, or you get run over. Yeah. And I know there's going to be a direct focus, particularly at level 3, on certain subsectors within the investment management industry that will have wider appeal to professionals. So I'm excited about the changes. And like I said, I think either you do them or you become extinct. So, which really is a reminder to me as we approach our 100-year anniversary. To me, that's a big deal. I look at the last 100 years, look at the ebb and flow of the markets. That's going through severe recessions, and we have survived. And we have survived for a reason, because we continue to evolve.
Yeah.
So I want to switch gears a little bit. There's no way we're going to do this without getting your thoughts on market conditions and the landscape. Gautam and I share a very similar value approach to investing that typically will include quite a few financial holdings. We're in the midst of what may be another banking crisis, depending on who you can talk to. We've had 3 of the 30 largest financial institutions in this country fail within a 6 or 8 week time period. What do you think? We've had a pretty impressive policy response, but in some respects, here we are in the middle of May 2023, and the uncertainty lingers. What are your current thoughts on the banking crisis today?
So clearly the banks are in a better shape than they were in 2008 or going into 2008 because capital ratios are higher. And the most recent cause of the failure, of course, was higher interest rates. And to some extent, that's subsiding already. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, just because capital ratios are higher doesn't mean that they cannot be overwhelmed by moderate losses. And we all know that the commercial real estate market is a ticking bomb that does have the potential to destroy capital ratios. And we all know that dominoes can fall. So I am concerned about the banking industry, despite the fact that the capital ratios are higher. In my personal portfolios, I have no exposure to banks with high commercial real estate. So in aggregate, things look better than they did in 2008. But I think there's a small but non-trivial probability that it is 2008 all over again, and it's just going to unfold over the coming months.
Well, I think one of the things that we've talked about was the progress from 2008, which is hit or miss. Yes, the capital levels are higher. I think they're considerably higher, which I think that's an improvement. The larger banks are certainly more heavily regulated. I don't think they were in a position to make questionable loans over the last decade or so. My only thought is they should come through this okay. Those commercial real estate loans that you mentioned, hard to argue with that. That's very worrisome. The good news there, well, if you call it good news, a lot of those reside on the balance sheets of the smaller banks, which we don't own, but for the sake of our economy, that is indeed very worrisome.
Yep.
We have a number of props here. Most of these are including the couple of required reading in terms of value investing land. But I grabbed this one here from our friend Mervyn King, who of course led the Bank of England. He's spoken here in Chicago. This is a book that I recall from one of your quarterly letters, one of only 2 books that you read twice in your life.
Yeah.
He does have suggestions in terms of the banking system. I believe he had one that said take the capital all the way up to 25%. Most banks today are 10, 12, 13 or 14. The European banks are a little bit higher. But any takeaways from here that you think might be relevant to this crisis, or anything you wanted to share from this book?
I think the suggestion I would have, I don't know if he specifically mentions this, and the suggestion I have is perhaps a bit extreme, or it's going to sound extreme. Banking may need to be run as a utility. It is an essential item, without which the rest of the economy doesn't work.
Right.
Just the way electricity is an essential item without which nothing works. Yeah. Do you expose an essential item to the vagaries of the market?
Yeah.
In the past, we have not treated banking as a utility. And it has worked out very well. But given the fragility that high indebtedness at the federal level in particular, given the fragility that the high level of indebtedness causes, I think a time may come when banking may need to be run as a utility. The top 10 banks, they're all utilities who are allowed to earn a regulated rate of return. And there are no other banks. All other banks get subsumed in that. I know it's an extreme suggestion, but that may be what's needed to counter the fragility that I see down the road.
Interesting. I know we would love to have our free markets flow as is, which we have done. But it's hard to argue with some of that. If we're going through, this is the most highly levered business, sort of the ultimate cyclical, built on confidence only. If that confidence were to erode, all of a sudden you get an 08 again where the system is on the brink. And hopefully we don't get to that point. But
yes, I certainly hope so.
Yeah.
I'm not advocating that we do it proactively because it's a better way to do things.
Right.
I'm simply concerned that that's maybe where we end up.
Sure. Very good. Fair enough. I'm hoping the next question is related to our sweet spot. Gautam and I both work in value investing, U.S. portfolios, also an international flavor. The last 10 or 15 years have not been very kind to value, and certainly not to international investing. 2022, that did change. Value had a terrific year, particularly in the U.S., but then it flipped a little bit in the first quarter of this year. But international markets have outperformed since about September of last year, right about the same time the U.S. dollar started to weaken. I'm very excited about the next 3 to 5 years, maybe more, and that we may see a comeback in international investing. Do you share that sentiment?
I think value is going to do very well, but our definition of value needs to change.
Okay.
The benchmark definition of value, as you and I both know, is woefully inadequate.
Mm-hmm.
The focus on book value, which is such an antiquated concept in a world when intangible assets are becoming bigger and bigger relative to tangible assets. So long as you give me a different definition of value, the one that I like, which I've liked for 25 years, which includes intangibles, puts fair value on R&D, takes a long-term orientation, not a short-term orientation. I think value is going to do great. And this observation that international hasn't done well. Part of it simply is the value versus growth
Very much
phenomenon.
so. Yeah.
International companies, on average, are more traditional value companies. And I'm not expecting a renaissance for traditional value.
Okay.
There may be cyclical ups if oil prices go to 100.
Right.
But I'm not expecting a long-term renaissance. I actually think, for example, biotech has great value right now.
Okay.
Now, biotech is not included in the value indexes.
Right.
But right now, biotech is great value. So I think that so long as the definition of value is valuation relative to growth and quality, that to me is the three-legged stool. Focus on valuation, look for cheap stocks, but do that in the context of quality and growth. Once you give me that definition, I'm willing to bet that value would do better than any other style.
Very good. I certainly agree with that. I'll give you a chance to elaborate on that. A lot of your work, as you mentioned, is specifically identifying intangible assets, which isn't all that commonly done in the industry. So certainly an area where you can add value that versus your competitors. Has anything changed on that as the marketplace adapted? I'm thinking about the value of the Starbucks green sign. How do you assign a value to that? Or the brand loyalty that you see at Apple when we just continue to buy one phone after the next. How would you characterize that?
I think brands are valued pretty fairly.
Are they? Okay.
So the advertising expense, which builds brands, I think is fairly recognized. I think R&D is still under-recognized.
Okay.
R&D, as you know, the payoff is over the next 20 years. And when the focus is on earnings for the quarter or price earnings ratios, where R&D just gets written off, it doesn't show the value of R&D. So R&D is not properly recognized. Mm-hmm. The network effect is better recognized than before, obviously. At one time, even that was not recognized. So I think there's a difference in which intangible assets are better recognized, which ones are not. Brands are very well recognized. R&D still is not. Network effect is still somewhere in between.
Okay. So certainly opportunities abound there for somebody who can dig in and do their homework on
Absolutely.
these. Yes. Okay. Very good. From a broader level, be interested in your thoughts on this. We've had 15 years of, what we call pretty heavy policy accommodation. Yeah. And that's both on fiscal and monetary. Sure, we had rates at zero for a long time, but we've also had quite a bit of stimulus, the COVID stimulus, which, in some respects, I want to give them a pass because the pandemic comes once every 100 years. But in retrospect, we probably overdid it, probably too generous in terms of the stimulus that we doled out here in the U.S. And you mentioned the high indebted levels just as a whole, which it's hard to ignore that. Collectively speaking, when you add all that together, what are the consequences? Is there a price to pay for all this accommodation, how that unwinds, or can we slowly sort of muddle through?
I think in the past, we have been able to muddle through.
Right.
And it's possible that we would muddle through if growth rates turn out to be, say, higher than 3.5%. If growth rate is 6%, yes, all the sins of the past would be forgotten.
They don't matter, no.
But chances that we are going to get to not even 6, even 4.5 to 5 would be enough. But what are the chances we're going to get to 4.5% consistent growth? It's hard to imagine that absent something big happening, for example, an energy breakthrough.
Something in renewables.
Yeah. I mean, if you get an energy breakthrough, low cost, reliable source of energy, for the next decade, maybe even more, you could grow at a rate that covers the sins of the past. But in the absence of that, it is believing in the fact that there's no free lunch.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that the bill is not going to come to you.
Right.
But in what form it comes to you, I don't know. I don't know if you have some specific thoughts on how it might come to you. But we are pretty soon going to get to the point where the discretionary part of the budget is going to approach zero.
Mm-hmm.
What happens then?
Yeah. Hard to see how this exactly is going to manifest itself. But I view, higher rates, it's just going to be more expensive to do business. And I think the next time we need a stimulus package, I'm not sure there's going to be much of an appetite in Congress to pass that. So the theme that we've been trying to advocate is a push toward quality, because of that. And at Logan Capital, we focus on very little leveraged companies, very high dividend yields, and then we view cap as a strength too. So we're market cap. But I think if you tie that in with a related note, and I have this article here on somewhere in here on the workers here in the U.S. The article references the U.S., but it could be else. It could apply to international companies. And in a nutshell, it says companies are treating workers nicely. And employees today are happier than they had been at any point in the last 30 years. It's a feel-good article, which is nice to see, but you and I know they're not doing that to be nice.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of now the labor market is tighter. You're having to pay more. So if you're paying more on interest, you're paying more to your employees. All of these things are going to weigh on profit margins,
right,
which is what pushes us into quality. So you have almost like a hockey stick in terms of profit margins in the U.S. for the last 30 years. To me, it was driven by a lot of those, the other side of those factors. And we may be in an extended period where those profits come down quite a bit. And we think quality will come back to matter because of that. Would you share that?
So I think because my career length is probably a decade or more longer than yours, this idea that margins are going to revert, I used to think exactly the same way too.
Okay.
But I think the labor versus capital fight is over, and it doesn't look like labor is coming back, despite the short-term gains that you might see in Chicago or elsewhere.
Okay.
So unless I see evidence that margins are going to revert, I'm actually inclined not to make my investment decision based on that belief. I'm not saying they're going to go up.
Right.
But I think the advantages that some companies and some industries accrue, whether it's networking effect or others, will sustain the margins, and the share is not going to go back to workers.
Okay. I think it's a phenomenal development to watch to see how that shakes out. Because you certainly could argue that the technological advantages are still in place, and more so the companies can do more with less, and which may support your side of that. So okay. We're going to stick with, as value guys, we like to focus on some of the challenges and try and protect us on the downside. But given that we both work in global markets, thought it might be nice to reflect on some of the global challenges. So we had Zanny Minton-Beddos last year as our keynote speaker. She, of course, is the editor-in-chief of The Economist. Right. She highlighted a number of global issues that she feels are a lot more poignant today than at any point in her roughly 30-year career. And she pointed specifically to not only the challenges in Russia and Ukraine, which she made clear is just a war of attrition. This is not going to have a very quick or happy ending. And also that we should be looking at, we should be taking China-Taiwan tensions very, very seriously. Those are just a couple. There are others. Do you share the view that there are always going to be geopolitical risks, but you know what? They're stronger today?
Oh, I absolutely think they're stronger today. Because the last post-World War II global order, U.S. was the only superpower.
Right.
And that's not what we see in the future. And as a result of that, challenges do increase because you don't have a single leader that the rest of the world can agree to follow. So the U.S.-China growing tension and rivalry clearly is the biggest global challenge. And it is going to cause resource wastage from an economic standpoint because the rivalry between China and whoever chooses to affiliate with China versus let's pick a few countries. Yeah, U.S., Japan, Australia, South Korea, possibly India, lining up on the other side. So there's going to be a lot of wasted resources from an economic perspective as this new dual rivalry gets played out. But beyond that, I think economic issues could come up. The role of fiat currencies, for example, could become a much bigger issue than it is today. I know that cryptos brought that to the attention for a while, and right now cryptos seem to be less popular than they were. But this whole idea of whether the current fiat currency system can keep going for another 50 years, it could be a bigger challenge than what we expect right now. I think most people don't even understand that fiat currency has value because we just believe. Because in daily transactions, we give a $20 bill and we get a service in return. But really thinking about how we got to this point, learning from history, learning from this book called The End of Alchemy by Mervyn King, I think it's essential reading for us to know how we got to this system so we can be aware when changes come, we can adjust.
Excellent. Yeah, the financial history is a phenomenal aspect. One of the things I'm trying to work on as chair of the board is improving our financial literacy.
Yes.
Which isn't necessarily related to this, but in some respects it is.
Yeah.
Because I don't think collectively, I don't think it's very good in this country. And to understand the history of just money and banking and currencies, it's not there just because it is or it has to be.
Right.
There are reasons why that could be questioned. So, I think that even the 50-year timeline that you mentioned, that may be an aggressive target for it to survive that long. Well, good. As we sort of wrap up with a few comments career-wise, you already touched on one in terms of currencies. What else do you see out there? Particularly, what advice would you have for the young professionals career-wise? And I'm thinking of the skill sets. You come with a pretty strong technical background, very good in the weeds. Then the other side of the coin would be some of the softer skills, the marketing skills, and talking to the media, things that you've done frequently in your career. Is there anything that you would steer the young folks towards today?
I think in terms of substance, I would say you got to think about what's your edge. What are you good at? What can you do better than others? And if you cannot identify a specific edge, then you have to say, what do I need to learn to gain that edge? So I would say that's clearly to self-reflect on that and get the training you need to have some edge in some field. And also this idea of beating the market, which at one time was very glamorous. It's a little less glamorous now, but it's still glamorous. It is something to think about whether that's as a sole goal makes sense as a career. Beating the market in publicly traded
very difficult.
Is very difficult. But that doesn't mean that you cannot add value to a client, whether it's institutional or individual. For an individual, you can add value by steering them in the right direction, the right asset allocation, the risk tolerance, figuring out how to minimize taxes. And so I'm suggesting a more comprehensive financial planning type of an approach if you're building your skill set rather than just picking the best stocks.
Yeah.
And of course, on the institutional side, there are some sectors or subsectors which are less of a zero-sum game. Venture capital, for example, maybe even private equity, distressed, where you have the potential to increase the pie.
Yeah.
And it's always good to be affiliated with opportunities where there's a potential to increase the pie rather than simply competing in the zero-sum arena where you got to be better than the other guy. There's no guarantee that the other guys are less smart than you are.
No, very, very difficult to do. Well, good. We're coming to the end here. We're going to highlight one other prop here. This is the old mug. This is the
Yes.
75th anniversary when it was referred to as the Investment Analyst Society of Chicago. We're coming up on 100 in a very short time. As we approach that, is there anything else you would like to share? Either suggestions for the society at large, or some advice toward the current board members, to our members? Really, anything else you'd like to add?
I think I mentioned that I lived through the golden age of finance and investing.
Mm-hmm.
I loved finance and investing. I love the fact that I was able to have a career in it. But as I think about those who are looking at these fields, what I would say is don't do what I did, which is I focused on business, finance, investing since the age of 13. That's not the way you want to do things in the future. Even if finance and investing seems glamorous, come at it from science and technology perspective. Learn science, learn technology. A bachelor's degree in business is actually too early now that I know more. Get your bachelor's degree in something other than finance.
Okay.
Come back to finance, learn finance on the side, get a CFA. But there's no need to focus that early on finance when you're 18 years old. You want to learn science and technology. That's going to drive the world. Finance will always be needed. It'll always be important. But I don't think it's going to grow you as a person. It's not going to grow as fast as some of the newer scientific fields. So stay abreast of the latest in technology and science. And then then also learn finance. It's important, but don't make that the narrow focus too early.
Very good. Very good. You can acquire those skills later. I tend to agree with that.
Yeah. The CFA program is a perfect example.
Yeah.
You can acquire the finance and investing skill after your bachelor's degree or as part of the bachelor's degree.
Yeah. Well, it's good for two practitioners to share that belief in the arts, liberal arts education, the science, the technology, and then specialize later.
Yes.
I think that's a great way to do it. Well, good. I think we're wrapping up here. It's been a real pleasure, Gautam. You are nothing short of a giant in our industry.
You're very kind.
Well, it's the truth. So it's been a real pleasure having you here. I think this is a podcast that's going to age well. I would encourage our members and guests to watch it and watch it again. So we'll wrap it up there. Gautam, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.
And thank you to our viewers and our guests.